Welcome to the Ford City Library, where I'm standing right now with George Skamai. Not in the capacity of a county commissioner now. This is the capacity of the artiste. This is the one who makes all this wonderful artwork happen. I got to just go back to early 80s, right, whenever you began all this.
Yeah, I was just monkeying around with an old wood-burning pen.
Monkeying around,
Well,
yeah.
honestly,
just out
it
in the
was
garage,
I swear to you, that's all it was. Experimental. I'd never done it before, but I did a little wood burning of a grouse and a hunter, and my dad saw it. I showed it to him. I said, "What do you think, Dad? You know, that looks pretty good." He said, "I'll mind if I take that to PPG where he worked, show his buddies." I said, "Sure, of course, you know." And came home the next day. Would you be willing to sell that? And I was a little surprised by the prospect of somebody buying something that I created. You know, it hadn't happened in my world previous to that. So anyhow, I said, "Sure, Dad." He asked me what I wanted. I had no idea. Long story short, he sold it for $35 and said, "Hey, could you do another guy wants a picture of a buck." Yeah, you know, because I like doing wildlife at that time.
But prior to that, you hadn't done anything.
Nothing. Just in high school, you know, I was class artist. So that was my claim to fame, that and class clown. I don't know how the two go together, but you know me on the political side.
Both is very artistic, no matter which way you go on it.
But, you know, it's always, I remember even in grade school, you know, when you have a little bit of an artistic bent, sometimes it gives you some perks along the way. You get to go to the board and draw things. And, you know, so, you know, I enjoyed doing that.
Now we see the other side of Mr. Skamai.
But, you know, it was just, it was truly happenstance, God's will, I suppose, in that I never anticipated it would ever develop to a point where I was producing artwork for the law firm at which I worked. I remember the idea the first year that they were going to take a piece of art that I'd created and turn it into a holiday card. And, you know, print, at that time it was 3,500 copies. I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. You know, this is my big break. I thought, yeah, well, it did continue for 14 years. I did 14 editions for them. It grew in popularity to the point of where we were printing 12,500, 13,000 cards each year. And it was very satisfying in that the partners, the big players there, would come to my office and tell me stories, you know, given clients that I remember one, Mr. Harmon said he had a very difficult client in Kentucky, and he said it's one of the firm's larger clients. He said, "George," he said, I won't use the language he used, but he said, they were real buggers to deal with. Never can get a smile out of this guy. He said he actually picked the phone up and called me and said of all the holiday cards he received, that was his favorite. And
really?
Yeah, it made me feel good, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, he said he wasn't the type of person, according to Mr. Harmon, who would take that initiative unless he was being sincere about it. So things like that along the way were motivational for me. I always tried to work a Bible verse that I use on my signature, 1 Corinthians 10:31, into the art that I create. And the first card, and we take a shot at that later, but the first card that I created for them involved a lot of wood grain. And so the original was probably, I don't know, 11 by 14. So very small in the wood grain, I wrote 1 Corinthians, COR.1031. Real small, right? Thinking, nobody will ever see that. I don't know it's there, but nobody will ever see it. Didn't one of the attorneys pick up on that and call me out on it and say, you have to fix that. You can't put that in because it has to be a secular card. It can't have any type of, you know, religious marks. Yeah, so I said, okay. So I did. I erased it, but then I hid it elsewhere. Sorry, Mark. Mark Nowak, I love you. He was a good guy.
Okay, so you started out, how old were you when you were doing the wood burning?
18.
Okay, so you're just, you know, getting out of high school. You're starting into this. But obviously, you know, did you sit and doodle on your tablet and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, heavens, yes.
Yeah, so you had a lot of
to my
artwork.
detriment, you know, most of the time, because instead of taking notes in school, I would find myself doodling. I found out later in life, though, that is a function of my ability to
process.
Yes, I'm listening, but I'm doodling. Sometimes I'm writing notes, but it helps me to to take information in. And so at the time, I didn't realize it. I just got in trouble for drawing a lot. So.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze you or anything.
Well,
but
you don't have enough time. You have enough
but
tape.
that truly is a function of the brain that actually does do that actually causes you to process the other information. So yeah, so I mean that's a very healthy thing, and most people don't have that ability. So you go into this wood burning thing,
Yes.
But then you transition, because I see all kinds of stuff that should have been in the Saturday Evening Post or something like that.
Thank you for saying that.
I mean, my goodness, that's what, and it's kind of, it has that flavor to it. Did you look at that? You know, did you look at Thomas Kincaid, all those things, and like did it?
Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell was a big
sure.
influence in that regard.
I can
just
see that,
appreciated what he did. Yeah, the story he could tell with a single, piece of art. He used the technique where he exaggerated features to emphasize the point that he was trying to bring through in his art. And I would never necessarily take it to that extent, because I was working with people that I knew, mostly relatives of mine, and a lot of the cards and such. But so I didn't want to make them look like caricatures, so to speak. But yeah, he was an early influence. And then on the more the fine art end of what I try to do, I looked at a lot of the Renaissance artists, especially Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, and the religious pieces that they did, and I found a lot of inspiration in those. And
you have it, and you've captured it in various parts of art in that with that feel. I mean, when I look at this, I mean, I can feel the different periods that you've drawn from in order to make this happen.
I appreciate that. Yeah. It was happening at the time. I look back in retrospect, and I even sort of surprised myself in saying that, yeah, I see the influence now. At the time, it was just something that appealed to me, and I wanted to try to reproduce, the style, what have you. But the wood burnings were really the first art that I produced and sold on regular and large scale. I always felt as though, when I was doing portraits especially, that working with wood was somewhat limiting, in that the wood burning pen would take the heat more readily over the grain than it would between the grain. And so maintaining tonal control through that is very difficult. And it took me a long time to get to the point where I could master it, but it was time consuming, and I always felt like if I just did this with a pencil or a paintbrush or a pen, I could do so much, because I would deliver them and people would say, oh, this is great. But I always thought I could do better if I was, there was the...
So you transitioned then.
Yeah, exactly.
Really? Now, okay, I've got to ask you the ultimate question here, and it's probably out of order, but you have kids.
Yeah.
You have a wife, family.
Yeah.
You have, and I've come through that period of my life. My kids are all grown and out of the house and gone. But I remember when they were there. George, how in the world did you ever find time to do this? I mean, did you get up at 4 o'clock? I mean, because I know how inspiration is. It'll hit you.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you're into it, and time leaves you. It's like you don't know what time it is. You don't know what's,
Yeah,
so I got it. I know this.
You hit it on the head. And I did, I went to bed at 3 and 4 in the morning a lot of times, because, well, I didn't want to quit. I was on a roll, I was enjoying it. And yeah, the earlier part of the evening was probably spent with the kids or at some function or what have you. I have videotape that proves I was a good dad, so, right?
We can bring the rest of the family up here right now.
But, so, I mean, I was there for sled riding and the whole bit.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it did take a lot of, it is time-consuming, weekends and things like that. But it was, I hate to use cliches, but it was a labor of love. And I did enjoy the kids coming in and leaning over and watching me and asking questions. It was never a bother. I have 3 children, the oldest of which, Elizabeth, who took her creativity into the photography field. Would like to think, perhaps there was some inspiration from some of the work that I did. Hannah's my second oldest. She's finishing Edinburgh this year, and she's in animation and extraordinarily talented.
I'm sure gifted. Yeah, yeah. Well, the what is the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
In good and bad ways.
Oh, that's true. Now I'm looking around. You know, you have all of this, and like I said, this you can, folks. Whenever you see this, as we put different parts of this on the screen, you can actually see those of you that have studied art at all a little bit. You know that there are periods of art of when the great artist did something, and this is the Norman Rockwell of Armstrong County here. This is the guy that has captured. And I mean, you obviously didn't have these people stand there for 14 hours while you were.
No, you know, I had the benefit of modern photography, and it's funny you point to this one. This involved the subjects are my nephew, Andy, and my oldest daughter, who I mentioned, Elizabeth, and Hannah, my second oldest child. Hannah was never one that sat very well for photographs, and trying to get her smile. It's not that she wouldn't smile; she just wouldn't pay attention to what you were trying to accomplish. So, her love for animals, in this case, played out very well. We put a kitten that we had on the ground while she was sitting there, and the expression you see on her face was from the cat, not from what I portrayed in the drawing of her falling.
You portrayed she was falling,
Right.
but she was enamored by the cat.
Absolutely, and it was one of the funnier scenes when I look back on it now. I still have the photographs that I worked from originally, and the cat's sitting there squarely, plump between her legs, just as she was. It just made her happy, and that's what I was looking for. I'm surprised, I guess. But anyhow, yeah, wow. There's a story behind all of them.
The picture of Christ.
Yeah.
The wood burning. It's just, wow. I mean, I look at it, and now, what did you work from for that?
That, I found in some reference book in Indiana library when I was working in Indiana, I ran across a picture at J. Homo. And Behold the Man is the interpretation from the Latin. And, wow, I just saw so much emotion and feeling in that, and that was one of the first wood burnings that I did of a religious nature. The other one that I have here is it's titled "The Blood of Christ." So these are replications of other artists' work. It's just a completely different medium. These were etchings done with ink, and of course I'm reproducing them in wood. But again, it's just the emotion that kind of inspires me.
Yeah, I mean, the Virgin Mother. I mean, you're right. You have taken all of your catechism and basically pulled it all into art.
Yeah,
I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I give God the credit for my ability, the opportunities He's given me, and it's been very satisfying. And so, just a way to give some recognition, some credit to God, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, give back to what He has given you, no doubt. That's I think it's part of that's called tithing. Tithing of the talent. The one over here, the Christmas time. What is that?
Yeah, that was a little later. That was taken in my home, and by that point, you can see I was using color, and I was bending the rules that I was stuck with earlier in producing the artwork, which was keep it very secular, George. No green, no red, no gold. Of course, no images of Christmas or Christianity. That I use Christmas lights. I use some garland in the back, and obviously the red and green in there. But at that point, I had already produced probably 8 or 10 cards for the firm, and they were so successful that nobody was really clamping down the way they did earlier on in concern with being politically correct. Right. I obviously still kept within the constraints of not going, too far to the religious bent or the Christianity.
When you left there, they must have been devastated.
Well,
you were the resident.
I loved it, man. It was a great job. I learned a lot. I was there for 9 years, so even after I was gone, they still hired me to do their cards for an additional 5 years until they decided that they wanted to go with electronic cards. Actually, the last card I produced for them was printed and done with flash technology to provide it online. Yeah, you know,
Yeah, to get more modern, sure.
yeah, you know, it's saving trees, I guess.
I haven't seen the one at the courthouse yet, though.
Hey, I'm working on something because we want to put a cupola on. The cupola's in terrible bit disrepair, and one thing I thought about doing was producing a card or a print or something of the courthouse, but something I want to take a unique angle on it because there have been enough photographs and drawings of it over the years. But anyhow, if I could do something like that and get it reproduced through donations, what have you, I would like to produce that to sell for, and the proceeds go towards the repair of the cupola because it's an expensive endeavor, over $250,000. So
I had the opportunity to be on the roof of the admin building, you know, and then
yeah,
looking across, I took several photos while I was up there. I was snapping quite a few.
Be interested in seeing them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that again, a different perspective because when you're on the
Yes.
ground looking up, but
Right.
now you're up almost even with it looking
Right.
across.
Right.
And it gives you a totally different perspective.
That's
So
what I'm looking for.
I'm
so.
not the artist, but I
Well,
understand,
hey,
you know.
it starts with a photograph.
Yeah,
For me,
it's-
anyhow.
Well, and it's that's about where it ends for me. But, what do you want to communicate whenever you do this?
Oh my heavens! Because so many of my pieces are commissioned. Okay, I don't get an opportunity to produce the things that we sort of discussed here. The greatest satisfaction for me is hearing from the client after they've received the artwork, and a lot of times the artwork is done as a surprise for somebody for a holiday, you know, Christmas obviously, Mother's Day, birthdays, things like that. And I have numerous cards and letters that people have written back and said how happy the recipient was and that they cried.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to make people cry, but at the same time, you know that really hit home for them. And
Meaningful.
that just means that looking back on those cards and something I've done recently because of the show, it's an inspiration. So what do I want to communicate? I guess it's more, I'm looking for, you know, the satisfaction that they're pleased with the product than anything.
Yeah.
So
Well, you're making a huge contribution to this county,
well, I
and
appreciate that, but
because you know everyone makes their mark. You know the Villa restaurant for so many years, of course, has its distinction. But you are, and I mean it very honestly, you are the artiste of Armstrong County.
Right.
You are the Norman Rockwell.
I
You're able to do this in ways I can't even imagine. But thank you.
Thank you
for
for
doing
taking
it.
the time,
Well,
Dave.
thank you for giving this to us. Thank you for imparting it to this area and allowing us to see it. I mean, I have been wanting to see it, and every time he was somewhere and he was showing it, I couldn't go. And whenever I found out he was going to be at the Fort State Library, I said, I'm going to that.
I saw him setting up the camera. I'm going, wait, this isn't for me. Surely there's a meeting after this. You're going to be here for that.
No, because I knew if I told you, you'd say, don't do that.
No, you know me. You're right.
But I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to be a part of this because of how wonderful it is. So thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it, man.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
All right.
I'm going to be putting an Etsy site up. Well, if you're familiar with Etsy at all?
No.
Okay, it's just a web. It's a site designed for people who are creative bent to put their wares out there. And my wife has been on me for some time. Georgie, you got to get your stuff out. You got your stuff out. Well, I think maybe I'm going to finally. It's sort of again kind of inspired me to maybe rekindle that part of my life. But anyhow,
All right.
thank you.
All right.